Alright guys, TacticalRab again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. Rostermania is upon us post Major 3 in Toronto, and a surprising change has got to be said coming down from the Boston Reach. We knew they needed to do something. Failed massively at the last Major, 50 points on the board, still in the CDL so far this season, nowhere near qualifying for the World Championship, but technically it's not over, and if it's never chalked, there's one man you want to bring into the team. Pentagrxm is gone, MajorManiak is back in for another stint in the CDL. They have been trying to find a way from now to the end of the season in which they can keep Snoopy and Beans, I imagine, and find someone who can mould those guys into the players that they potentially need to be. Slasher wasn't the man, especially with Snoopy at the start of the season. Maybe this attempt is going to work. Very much interested your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. First of all, the Founding Fathers LAN, coming up in a few days time here, 30th of May, 2024, OpTic, FaZe, Thieves, what a picture this is. Now, JoeDeceives says the following: I've heard some of the undercard matches and they're fire. So, well, hang on a second, right? Like, this is playing video games, right? Like, we're not squaring up. Maybe we're squaring up, I don't know. Like, maybe there's a boxing ring and all this. But I imagine that it's going to be kind of like a continuation of what we saw with Case on a little while ago, where they did the online stuff, and then they were like, okay, let's kind of run something like this back on LAN. And, well, anyway, it's going to be pretty cool. It is a FaZe-related thing as well, so good to see them doing something, I guess, since Banks has kind of come back into the mix. If you guys didn't see the news the other day as well, Black Ops 6 has been officially confirmed as this year's Call of Duty title. Here's Matt Scrontz back at it again with well, what I believe is going to be a pretty damn good game. Now, what rosters will we see for next season? That, of course, remains to be seen. These are some of the player cards then. Very interesting stats actually here from FaZe. Almost absurd stats from FaZe in some way. 15 in 3.5 point this stage, 10 in 1 in control this stage, 6 and 7 in Search and Destroy this stage. And this is kind of why people say, look, Search and Destroy wins championships and all this stuff, because, you know, technically you look at the, you know, if you actually did the data crunching, maybe hardpoint is the most important mode in the sense that, you know, you play 2 of them before you even get to the search. So if you're really good in hardpoint, then it probably is the best thing for you. But the reality is of tournament play, when you get to Championship Sunday, you play the best teams, Search and Destroy becomes the most important mode because you are going to be in Game 5s. Like, if you want to win championships nowadays with FaZe and Ultra and OpTic and, you know, even New York to some extent on the board, you're going to have to win Game 5s, and if you're not so good at doing so, you're going to go out of the tournament. That's what happened, of course, here to FaZe. Simp at the 98 overall, Drazah the 97 overall, who's been, you know, just really good for these guys, honestly. Like, obviously, the out-of-game stuff is a bit of a question, but nonetheless, Drazah has been cooking. Cellium only with a 91, which is kind of low for his standards, I guess, but he did have the highest overall KD in his role on hardpoint KD, which is probably what you might expect, and the same thing for Simp in the damage category. But yeah, that is still kind of fascinating, isn't it, that they lost, I mean, what, 1 out of 6 Search and Destroys they played on LAN or something, or they won 1 out of 6 Search and Destroys they played on LAN, and that was the difference maker, because they started the stage pretty well in Search, but when it mattered, that game mode fell away from them somewhat. This is Toronto Ultra, who, well, I mean, have a look at this. Scraps at a 99 again. He's been in a 99, I'm pretty sure, every single stage this season, which is ridiculous. Envoy's here at an 83. Like, that's just the level of play that Scrappy is performing at the moment. As I've said before, like, it's the consistency that gets me. And his search was better this stage. He was actually their best Search and Destroy player, which was one of the features of his game that was lacking, right? Major 2, Major 1, his search wasn't as good. And we talked about it in the comparison with Simp for MVP, because to me, that is probably still the debate. At least on the entire season so far, Simp or Scrap for me are probably the 2 MVP candidates. You can't look another way, but, you know, Simp had the highest rated card here for FaZe. Obviously, 1 or 2 of the OpTic guys are creeping into that conversation now, and depending on what happens Major 4 and Champs, okay, to be fair, Major 4 is the final major of the regular season MVP, then there's a separate Champs MVP, so, you know, Scrap might now be my front runner, just because at the start of the season, Simp had the hardpoint and the Search and Destroy, but not, I think, necessarily the control, and it was Scrappy who had the hardpoint and the control and not the Search and Destroy. Now both of them kind of have, like, all 3 of the modes, and the fact that Scrappy grinded hard and got to a purple best in category damage per round in Search and Destroy is just absurd. right? So there's no one in the league you could put on this team instead of Scrappy that makes them better, like, or even the same. Every single player you would put on that team for Scrappy makes this team worse. So that's kind of why I think he's the MVP. But I guess time will tell, because there could well be other people in the conversation by the end of Major 4, depending what happens. These were the cards for OpTic. They played, by the way, so many hardpoints. They were 20-4 at hardpoint, right? Because they had to make the losers run and everything. They played 24 hardpoints this stage, winning 20 of them. Their search and destroy was big time, of course. Down the stretch in the game, Fires control's still actually in the negative, maybe somewhat surprisingly, but still, it was the hardpoint and the search where they did the majority of their damage. Dashy, by the way, back to a 99 rated card. He started out this season, I wouldn't say he was underwhelming, because I think he was doing what he was required to do, but he wasn't, you know, the takeover Dashy that we've known before, and maybe, you know, the way that Scrappy, for example, plays today is similar to how Dashy played back in Black Ops 4 or something. Nowadays, Dashy does play a different role, and we saw that at the start of the season, but it's changed somewhat, and his search has become really good. I mean, highest kills per rounds in the entire league, a 1.34 in search here for Dashy, which was just massively important, right, for their performance this stage. So he gets the 99 overall. Kenny as well, like, this is the thing. Kenny is not just the vibes guy, the comms guy. Like, in terms of damage per 10, kills per 10, he's putting up insane impact as well. And this is the overall stage, right? So if Pred is your weakest performing player, technically, over the entire stage, you're doing something right, you know, you really are. And obviously this is, you know, just for the stage and not for the major. However, one team that performs somewhat less well, certainly in Search and Destroy, were these boys, the Boston Breach. 1 in 13. It's kind of a shame, isn't it, that they won 1. Imagine they were 0 in 14. It would have been spectacular, but unfortunately it wasn't to be. These were their cards, and it wasn't really a pretty time for a couple of their guys, Priestahh for sure, but, you know, also Pentagrxm, right? Since Pentagrxm's come in, it's not been a good time for him. Even just watching his POV, you know, the decisions he makes, I wasn't impressed personally. And it's tough, you know, he's been wanting a chance in the league for some time. It happens, didn't make the most of it, and, well, it's probably going to come to an end, because it was actually confirmed yesterday what is going to be happening here. This is the standings as it stands. The Boston Breach, 50 points. They have not scored a point this entire stage. They are now 70 points behind the champs cutoff. There's 75 points on the line for second place in a major. So if they hold their own in the qualifiers, and then they get second at the major, or third at the major if they do really well in the qualifiers, they can still make the World Championship. It ain't going to happen, but they can still make the World Championship. What they need to think about Boston is, this team is terrible, and where do you go from here? Because they committed, when they got rid of Asim, they got rid of Slasher especially. Getting rid of Slasher was basically saying, okay, look, we're committed to Snoopy. We think that Slasher is, you know, not going to be happy with our vision for the team, so we're going to get rid of him. We're going to stick by Snoopy, and that's going to be our plan to effectively become Toronto Mark II, where they build up players in their academy system into becoming a very competitive team. And I do like the theory behind that. Whether it works is another question. And the other point is, well, who do you bring in with Beans and Snoopy, assuming you keep those two, to actually mold them and help them, especially Snoopy, play in the right way? Because Priestahh is a veteran, but he clearly isn't that guy. He's been there now for a little while, and it's not worked for him. So Pentagrxm obviously isn't that guy either. So what are you going to do? Well, it seems there's one man you call up in these scenarios, and that is MajorManiak. Sources emerging yesterday that MajorManiak is going to replace Pentagrxm on the Boston Breach, Priestahh to the SMG. There were rumours that they were going to do this, or at least were considering doing this quite a while ago now, and I think it makes a fair bit of sense. Priestahh on the AR, that second AR role hasn't been great. Could it be impactful again on an SMG? I do believe so. Priestahh is still, to me, one of the most, if not the most, versatile COD players that we have ever seen. He can run any role and do it all. If it ain't working on the AR, better off trying it on the SMG. Jake Howe was then reporting it as well, of course. His Maniac from his Florida Mutineers days, not actually OpTic Maniac, who was on the Florida Mutineers as well, way back at MW19 as a substitute, which is a wild time. But this is, of course, MajorManiak, a different Maniac. And yeah, Priestahh moving to an SMG. So Pentagrxm is gone. I will say kind of tough for Pentagrxm in the sense that obviously he did this tweet after the major, and I read it and I thought, like, you know, sure, he kind of implies here that he's going to stay around, but I'm not so convinced that's going to be the case, right? You never really know what actually is going to be happening, because, well, the team might be thinking one thing and he might be getting told another. So, yes, there's one more split to turn it around. But he isn't going to get the chance to do that, right? Because MajorManiak officially joins Boston. It's never chalked, which is like, that's his tagline, right? I don't know whether they, like, considered this tagline when they decided to make the move, because they were like, well, you know, we can still make champs. It's never chalked. Like, let's bring in the man with the aura, I guess, in MajorManiak. And you know, this guy actually gets a lot of credit from many pro players. Like Foreman and Dashy have often talked about how this guy is so typical. You know, they'll often say about Maniac how whenever he's in a clutch moment, he's always going to turn up and deliver. Now, he's not going to be the best in the respawn modes, well, at least that usually is the case. I guess if Snoopy and Beans play the right way, they do have the slaying power there. And interestingly enough, they do have MajorManiak and Priestahh now, which were a duo back in Valanta FaZe in MW19. But of course, back then they had MajorManiak Priestahh, Simp aBeZy. And, you know, there ain't no Simp aBeZy, unfortunately, on this Boston team at the moment. But I do think part of the idea is about the Game 5s, because their respawn has genuinely been, I don't want to say solid, because I don't think it has. But, you know, 6 in 9 in hardpoint is not terrible. And their control has legitimately been good. I mean, Priest has been good in that mode. Beans has been really good, I think, in that mode. So, you know, it's maybe not the end of the world. Like, their respawn record is actually in the positive for the stage. But it's just they lost every single search and destroy they ever played, and they lost a lot of search and destroys. Obviously, even at the major, they went out in 2 search and destroys. So I guess that's the plan. Bring in MajorManiak and teach these guys how to actually win search and destroys. These are MajorManiak's records. He's of course been playing in challenges. I'm not going to lie, for some time I thought that he might have just retired and like I didn't know if we were going to see him anymore. But the last time he played was early last year on the Florida Mutineers. Then of course he was gone. Havoc, Vikul, Dave, Pelly, MajorManiak. What a team that was back at the start of last season. Obviously back in Cold War, winning the event with Minnesota Rocker after going down 0-4, even back in Black Ops 4 on the Gen G team that arguably should have won an event, but of course fell short a couple of times in a row. So cool to see him back in the league, and you know, I gotta say, this is one of those opportunities that some players would probably say, well, you know, it's Boston, they're kind of chalked, don't know if I want to take the chance. But he backs himself. He says, like, I know the situation I'm putting myself into. Sounds like he's going into war, doesn't it? If anyone can turn the tide, I believe I'm that guy. I can't wait to compete again at the highest level. Thanks, Boston, for giving me the opportunity to showcase my talent to close out the season. So, you know, all things considered, it's probably not the worst move ever. I don't know if it's really going to massively move the needle here, but I do think Pentagrxm had to go. I do think the moving Priestahh to the SMG was something they should at least have considered, because it's really a learning exercise, right? You're basically doing testing from now to the end of the season, trying to figure out what actually works with these players. Is MajorManiak a good type of player to bring alongside Snoopy and Beans and those guys? Because, you know, you're probably going to keep them. Do you bring in another veteran like Slasher, like MajorManiak, for example, to try and make it work? Or next year, if this doesn't work with Maniac, do you say, right, we're just going to play 8s and bring in players with high pace and just, you know, run it up, basically? I don't know. This as well, Zero apparently mentioned this on stream, that Bance had had a couple of opportunities this year, potentially with Boston, because obviously he's talking about it at the same time that Boston are discussing changes. But I gotta wonder, right, could it have been, where could this have been? Because Bance seems a pretty solid player on this game. He's not killed it in challenges, but I definitely think there's teams that he could have well have improved, and apparently he's had multiple offers, but they all fell through for various unfortunate reasons, possibly some of them visa related. I would also quickly mention before we close out, I was kind of expecting some explanation on this from, you know, Dens, the general manager, because he does that quite a lot. Zed retweeted this, of course, the coach of the team. We had Doug Martin retweeting this. Well, we don't know what he is, right? Is he the shadow general manager? Like, what's he doing, this guy? But anyway, he reposts this change, and then Dens, I don't think, has said anything on the matter, at least as far as I can tell, which is kind of surprising to me that Dens didn't say anything. Of course, as the GM, you'd think so. So I don't really know what's going on behind the scenes there, but you know, maybe there's more changes behind the scenes at Boston than initially meet the eye, because it's clearly been an absolute mess in that camp now for some time. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.
The base is pretty good. Honey, get the fuck. I can't hear.
Did you just curse at me again?
Well, you walk in at the worst. Thank you. I'm not smoking weed with the guys again.
Smoking weed.
No, Rambo gifted 100 subs, honey. I did it for Gracie, so we can afford all these new tech appliances.